Lieutenant Commander Sarah Chen stood at the entrance of the Naval Special Warfare Command headquarters in Coronado, California. The morning sun cast long shadows across the concrete walkways as she adjusted her crisp uniform and checked her watch. Today marked the beginning of what would either be her greatest triumph or her most humbling failure. Sarah had worked tirelessly for 15 years to reach this moment. Born to immigrant parents who ran a small restaurant in San Francisco's Chinatown, she had grown up watching her mother count coins late into the night and her father work double shifts just to keep their family afloat. Education became her escape route, and the Navy became her calling. She graduated summa cum laude from the Naval Academy, where she had excelled not only in academics but also in physical training. Her instructors noted her exceptional leadership qualities and her ability to remain calm under pressure. After serving on 2 deployments aboard destroyers in the Pacific Fleet, she had applied for and been accepted into the Navy's Elite Strategic Planning Division. The building before her housed some of the most decorated warriors in military history, Navy SEALs who had served in the most dangerous corners of the world. Men who had earned their reputations through blood, sweat, and unimaginable sacrifice. Today, she would be walking into their world as their new commanding officer for strategic operations. As Sarah approached the main conference room, she could hear voices through the thick wooden door. The conversation stopped abruptly when her aide knocked and announced her arrival. She entered to find 12 men seated around a polished mahogany table, their faces a mixture of curiosity and barely concealed skepticism. The room fell silent as she took her place at the head of the table. These were not ordinary soldiers. Each man bore the scars and weathered features that came from years of combat operations. Their chests displayed ribbons representing Purple Hearts, Bronze Stars, and commendations from conflicts spanning 2 decades. Chief Petty Officer Mike Rodriguez, a 22-year veteran with tours in Iraq, Afghanistan, and Syria, leaned back in his chair and crossed his arms. His eyes scanned Sarah from head to toe, taking in her pristine uniform and the relatively few ribbons adorning her chest. To his left sat Senior Chief Tom Mitchell, whose reputation for successful hostage rescue operations was legendary within the community. Master Chief James Harrison, the most senior enlisted man present, had been in the teams for over 2 decades. His graying beard and numerous scars told stories of operations that would never make it into official reports. He had seen commanders come and go, but never had he worked under a female officer in a direct leadership role within special operations. Sarah could feel the weight of their collective gaze. She understood that her appointment had been controversial. The Navy was making progressive changes, and her selection represented a significant shift in how special operations units would be led. But progress often came with resistance, and she could sense that resistance radiating from every corner of the room. The tension was palpable as she opened her briefing folder. These men had earned their positions through trials by fire in the world's most dangerous locations. They had lost teammates, faced death countless times, and operated in conditions that would break most people. In their minds, leadership in their world needed to be earned through shared sacrifice and proven under enemy fire. Rodriguez shifted in his seat and glanced at Mitchell, a look passing between them that Sarah caught immediately. She had expected this reception. Her background in strategic planning and fleet operations, while impressive on paper, looked vastly different from the combat-heavy resumes of the men she now commanded. The morning briefing was scheduled to cover upcoming training exercises and potential deployment preparations, but Sarah knew that what happened in the next few minutes would set the tone for everything that followed. She needed to establish her authority while acknowledging their experience and expertise. As she prepared to speak, she noticed Rodriguez whispering something to the man next to him. The comment was barely audible, but she caught the words, "desk jockey," and saw the slight smirks that followed. This was exactly what she had prepared for during months of studying SEAL culture and operational procedures. The challenges ahead were not just professional but deeply personal. Sarah had sacrificed relationships, worked twice as hard as her male counterparts, and constantly proven herself in a male-dominated field. Now she faced her ultimate test, earning the respect of warriors who valued actions over titles and battlefield experience over academic achievements. Sarah cleared her throat and stood straighter, her voice carrying clearly across the room as she began her first briefing. She had barely spoken for 2 minutes about the upcoming training schedule when Chief Rodriguez interrupted her mid-sentence. "Ma'am, with all due respect," Rodriguez said, his tone dripping with thinly veiled condescension. "We've been running these operations since before you graduated from the academy. Maybe you could tell us about your combat experience instead of reading from that manual?" The room went dead silent. Every eye was on Sarah, waiting to see how she would respond to this direct challenge to her authority. Rodriguez leaned forward slightly, a cocky smile playing at the corners of his mouth. He had served in over 40 combat missions, earned 2 Purple Hearts, and had never backed down from a fight. Master Chief Harrison shot Rodriguez a warning look, but the damage was done. The gauntlet had been thrown down publicly, and Sarah's response would determine whether she would lead these men or simply be tolerated by them. Sarah set down her briefing folder slowly and deliberately. She had faced similar challenges throughout her career, but never quite so boldly or in front of such a formidable group. Her heart raced, but her expression remained calm and controlled. "Chief Rodriguez," she said evenly, "you're absolutely right about one thing. You have extensive combat experience that I deeply respect. But you seem to be making an assumption about mine." Rodriguez raised an eyebrow, clearly not expecting this response. He had assumed that her strategic planning background meant she had never seen real action. Most officers in her position had indeed spent their careers behind desks or on ship bridges, far from the dangers of ground combat. Sarah walked around the table slowly, her eyes never leaving Rodriguez's face. "You mentioned respect. Chief, respect is earned, not demanded. And it certainly isn't earned by interrupting superior officers or making assumptions based on incomplete information." The tension in the room ratcheted up another notch. Master Chief Harrison shifted uncomfortably in his seat, recognizing that this confrontation could either establish Sarah's credibility or destroy it completely. The other SEALs watched with the intensity of spectators at a prize fight. 3 years ago," Sarah continued, her voice growing stronger, "I was embedded with a Marine reconnaissance unit in Syria. Our mission was to identify and eliminate a high-value target who had been coordinating attacks on coalition forces. The operation went sideways when we discovered the target had moved to a heavily fortified compound." Rodriguez's smirk began to fade as Sarah continued speaking. She wasn't reading from a manual or reciting textbook scenarios. Her words carried the weight of lived experience. "The Marine unit leader was wounded by an IED, and command of the mission fell to me. We were pinned down for 6 hours by enemy fire, with wounded men who needed immediate medical attention. I had to make the call to adjust our extraction point and coordinate close air support while treating casualties." Sarah paused, letting her words sink in. The room remained completely quiet, but the atmosphere had shifted noticeably. These men understood combat stress and the weight of life and death decisions. They could hear the authenticity in her voice. "I spent 2 weeks in that desert, Chief Rodriguez. 2 weeks where every decision I made could have meant the difference between my men coming home or coming home in body bags. We completed the mission, eliminated the target, and everyone made it out alive. That operation earned me the Bronze Star with Combat Distinguishing Device." The revelation hit the room like a thunderclap. The Bronze Star with Combat Device was not a decoration given lightly. It represented valor in the face of enemy action, exactly the kind of credential these warriors respected above all others. Rodriguez's face had gone from cocky confidence to genuine surprise. He had not expected this revelation, and his assumption about Sarah's background was crumbling rapidly. The other SEALs exchanged glances, their initial skepticism giving way to grudging interest. "So when you question my qualifications," Sarah continued, moving back to her position at the head of the table, "remember that leadership isn't just about where you've been or how many missions you've completed. It's about making the right decisions when lives are on the line and bringing everyone home safely." Master Chief Harrison nodded slowly, his weathered face showing the first signs of approval. He had seen enough commanders come and go to recognize authentic leadership when he heard it. The fact that Sarah had served in combat conditions and earned her decorations through actual valor changed everything. Sarah picked up her briefing folder again. But instead of returning to her prepared remarks, she closed it and looked directly at each man around the table. "I know I have to prove myself to this team. I know my background looks different from yours, but I'm not here to replace your experience or diminish your expertise. I'm here to lead you, support you, and make sure we accomplish our missions successfully." The dynamic in the room had shifted dramatically in just a few minutes. Rodriguez sat back in his chair, his challenging posture replaced by something approaching respect. The casual dismissal that had marked the beginning of the meeting was gone, replaced by genuine attention to what their new commander had to say. 3 weeks after the initial confrontation, Sarah found herself facing her first real test as the team's commander. Intelligence had identified a terrorist cell operating from a compound in Yemen, and her unit had been tasked with conducting a high-risk extraction of 2 American journalists who had been captured while investigating the group's activities. The mission briefing took place in the same conference room where Rodriguez had challenged her authority. But the atmosphere was markedly different now. The SEALs listened intently as Sarah outlined the operation, their previous skepticism replaced by professional focus and growing confidence in their new leader. The compound sat in a remote valley surrounded by rocky terrain that offered both advantages and challenges for the assault team. Satellite imagery showed multiple buildings connected by covered walkways, with an estimated 15 to 20 armed guards maintaining security around the clock. "The hostages are being held in the eastern building," Sarah explained, pointing to detailed reconnaissance photos. "Intelligence suggests they're being moved every few days to different locations within the compound, which means timing is critical." Master Chief Harrison studied the imagery carefully. "What's our extraction timeline, Commander?" "We have a 4-hour window," Sarah replied. "The target has scheduled a video recording with the hostages tomorrow night, which gives us their exact location for that time frame. After that, they'll likely be moved again, and we may not get another opportunity." Rodriguez leaned forward, his earlier antagonism completely gone. "What about air support? That terrain looks like it could get complicated fast if we need to get out in a hurry." Sarah appreciated the change in his attitude. Over the past weeks, Rodriguez had proven to be not just a skilled operator but also a valuable strategic thinker when his ego wasn't involved. "We'll have 2 helicopters on standby, but the weather forecast shows possible sandstorms that could ground them. We need to plan for multiple extraction scenarios." Senior Chief Mitchell, who had been quietly analyzing the compound layout, raised a concern. "Commander, this setup reminds me of an operation we ran in Afghanistan 3 years ago. Similar terrain, similar compound design. That one went bad because we underestimated the enemy's ability to reinforce their position quickly." Sarah nodded, grateful for his insight. This was exactly the kind of expertise she needed to tap into. "Tell me more about what went wrong in Afghanistan." Mitchell pulled up his own photos from the previous operation. "We expected 15 hostiles, but they had a tunnel system that allowed them to bring in reinforcements from a nearby village. By the time we realized what was happening, we were outnumbered 3 to 1. The room fell quiet as the team absorbed this information. Sarah studied the Yemen compound photos again, looking for signs of similar tunnel systems or defensive preparations. The lives of 2 innocent journalists and her entire team depended on getting every detail right. "Good catch, Senior Chief," she said. "What would you recommend for this operation?" Mitchell pointed to several locations on the satellite images. "We need ground-penetrating radar to check for underground passages, and we should have a blocking force positioned here and here to prevent reinforcements from reaching the compound." Sarah made notes as he spoke. This was how she had envisioned leading this team. Not by imposing her will, but by leveraging their collective experience and expertise to develop the best possible plan. "Chief Rodriguez," she said, turning to the man who had challenged her just weeks earlier, "you've run more hostage extractions than anyone here. What's your assessment of the timeline?" Rodriguez studied the photos for several minutes before responding. 4 hours is tight, but doable if everything goes according to plan. The problem is that nothing ever goes according to plan. I'd recommend we have contingency plans for extending the operation if needed." Sarah found herself genuinely impressed by the quality of input she was receiving. These men were not just following orders. They were actively contributing to the mission planning process in ways that made the operation safer and more likely to succeed. "Here's what we're going to do. Sarah announced after absorbing all the feedback. We'll deploy in 3 teams. Alpha Team will breach the eastern building and secure the hostages. Bravo Team will establish a security perimeter and watch for reinforcements. Charlie Team will provide overwatch and coordinate with air support. She assigned Rodriguez to lead Alpha Team, recognizing his expertise in close-quarters combat and hostage extraction. Mitchell would command Bravo Team, using his experience to anticipate and counter enemy reinforcement attempts. Harrison would coordinate overall communications and serve as her tactical advisor. As the briefing concluded, Sarah noticed something that hadn't been present in their first meeting. The SEALs were engaged, asking detailed questions about equipment, timing, and contingencies. They were treating her as their commander, not as an outsider who had been imposed upon them. One more thing, Sarah said as the men prepared to leave. I know this is a dangerous operation. I know that some of you have families waiting at home. I want you to know that I will do everything in my power to bring everyone back safely. Rodriguez paused at the door and turned back to face her. Commander, we know you will. We've seen how you operate now. We trust your leadership. The words hit Sarah harder than she had expected. Trust was the most valuable currency in special operations, and earning it from these battle-tested warriors represented a milestone in her career that she would never forget. The helicopter blades cut through the desert night as Sarah and her team approached the target compound in Yemen. Through her night vision goggles, the rocky terrain below looked like an alien landscape painted in green and black shadows. Her heart pounded steadily, but her mind remained focused on the mission ahead. 2 minutes to insertion, the pilot's voice crackled through her headset. Sarah looked around the helicopter cabin at her team. Each SEAL was checking his equipment one final time, their faces displaying the calm concentration that came from years of dangerous operations. Rodriguez caught her eye and gave a subtle thumbs up. The transformation in their working relationship had been remarkable. What had started as open hostility had evolved into mutual respect and genuine teamwork. Tonight would test everything they had built together over the past month. The helicopters touched down silently in a depression half a mile from the compound. Sarah and her 12-man team moved quickly across the rocky ground, using hand signals to communicate as they approached their target. The night was moonless, giving them maximum concealment but also making navigation more challenging. Through her radio headset, Sarah heard Master Chief Harrison's voice providing updates from the command helicopter circling overhead. Overwatch to Alpha. I count 4 sentries on the perimeter, 2 more on the main building roof. No movement in the target building. Sarah clicked her radio twice to acknowledge the report. Everything was proceeding according to plan, but she knew from experience that operations could change rapidly once contact was made with the enemy. The team reached their first checkpoint without incident. Rodriguez's Alpha Team prepared to breach the eastern building, where intelligence indicated the hostages were being held, while Mitchell's Bravo Team took positions to secure the perimeter and block any reinforcements. Alpha Team in position, Rodriguez whispered into his radio. Sarah could hear the tension in his voice, but also the confidence that came from extensive training and preparation. Bravo Team ready, Mitchell reported seconds later. Sarah took a deep breath and made the call that would set everything in motion. All teams. This is Commander Chen. Execute, execute, execute. The compound erupted in controlled chaos as the SEALs moved into action. Rodriguez's team breached the eastern building door with precision, while Mitchell's men quickly neutralized the perimeter guards. The element of surprise was complete, and for the first few minutes, everything unfolded exactly as planned. Then the situation changed dramatically. Commander, we've got a problem. Rodriguez's urgent voice came through the radio. The hostages aren't here. The room is empty except for some old equipment and furniture. Sarah's mind raced as she processed this information. Intelligence had been certain about the hostage location based on intercepted communications. Either the information was wrong, or the terrorists had moved the journalists earlier than expected. Alpha Team, expand your search to the adjacent rooms, she ordered. Bravo Team, maintain security but be ready to reposition. From her position overlooking the compound, Sarah scanned the other buildings through her night vision scope. The main building showed signs of recent activity. with lights visible in several windows that had been dark during their surveillance. "Overwatch to Commander." Harrison's voice cut through her thoughts. "I'm seeing movement in the main building. Second floor. Could be your hostages." The main building was not part of their original plan. It was larger, had more potential hiding places, and posed significantly greater risks for the assault team. But if the hostages were there, they had no choice but to adapt. "All teams, new target is the main building. Second floor," Sarah announced. "Alpha team, move to the main building and prepare for entry. Bravo team, establish overwatch positions on the surrounding structures." As Rodriguez led his team toward the new target, Sarah noticed movement in her peripheral vision. Several figures were emerging from what appeared to be a concealed entrance on the north side of the compound. Exactly the kind of tunnel system that Mitchell had warned about during mission planning. "Contact, north side." Mitchell's voice exploded over the radio as enemy fighters began emerging from their hidden positions. Multiple hostiles, armed with automatic weapons. The mission had just become infinitely more complicated. Not only were the hostages in an unexpected location, but the team was now facing a larger enemy force than anticipated. Sarah had seconds to make decisions that would determine whether her people lived or died. "Bravo team, suppress those positions," she ordered. "Alpha team, accelerate your breach of the main building. We need those hostages located and secured before the enemy can organize a counterattack." Gunfire erupted across the compound as Mitchell's team engaged the emerging hostile forces. The distinctive crack of AK-47 rifles mixed with the measured responses from the SEALs' weapons as the firefight intensified. Through the chaos, Sarah maintained communications with her teams while analyzing the rapidly evolving tactical situation. Years of training and combat experience had prepared her for this moment, but the responsibility of commanding these elite warriors in actual combat still felt overwhelming. "Alpha team is breaching the main building now," Rodriguez reported between bursts of gunfire. "Heavy resistance on the first floor. We're fighting our way up to the second level." Sarah watched through her scope as muzzle flashes lit up the windows of the main building. Her people were inside, fighting room to room in close quarters combat while under fire from multiple directions. Every instinct told her to rush in and help them, but her job was to coordinate the overall operation and make the strategic decisions that would bring everyone home safely. The firefight intensified as Sarah realized her team was facing a much larger enemy force than intelligence had predicted. Through her radio, she could hear the rapid exchange of gunfire from inside the main building as Rodriguez's Alpha team fought their way through determined resistance. "Commander, we've got the hostages." Rodriguez's voice cut through the noise. "Two American journalists, both alive but injured. One has a gunshot wound to the leg, the other appears to have broken ribs." Relief flooded through Sarah, but she knew their problems were far from over. "Can they move under their own power?" "Negative on the wounded one," Rodriguez replied as automatic weapons fire echoed in the background. "We'll need to carry him out. Also, we've got at least 8 more hostiles between us and the exit." Meanwhile, Mitchell's Bravo team was engaged in a desperate battle with enemy reinforcements, who continued emerging from the tunnel system. "Commander, we're taking heavy fire from multiple positions," Mitchell reported. "They've got us pinned down pretty good. We need air support, and we need it now." Sarah quickly assessed their options. The sandstorm that threatened their helicopter extraction was still hours away. But calling in close air support in an urban environment with hostiles and friendlies intermixed was incredibly dangerous. "Overwatch, this is Commander Chen," she called to Harrison in the circling helicopter. "What's your assessment for danger close air support on the north tunnel positions?" Harrison's response was immediate. "Too risky, Commander. Alpha team's position in the main building puts them too close to potential blast radius. We could take out our own people." Sarah's mind raced through alternatives. Her team was outnumbered and separated, with wounded hostages to evacuate and limited ammunition. The textbook solution would be to call for reinforcements and wait for a larger force, but the hostages were badly injured and might not survive an extended firefight. Then she remembered something from her naval gunnery training that might solve their immediate problem. "All teams, "I'm going to create a diversion to draw enemy fire away from your positions," she announced. "When you see the signal, Alpha Team moves toward the extraction point. Bravo Team provides covering fire." "Commander, what kind of diversion?" Rodriguez asked, concern evident in his voice. Sarah was already moving toward the compound's northern perimeter, where she had spotted a fuel storage tank during their reconnaissance. If she could disable it properly, the explosion would be visible for miles and would certainly attract the attention of every hostile in the area. "Trust me on this one, Chief," she replied, drawing her sidearm and checking her remaining equipment. What Sarah planned to do went against every principle of command leadership she had been taught. Commanders were supposed to direct operations from safe positions, not expose themselves to enemy fire by conducting solo assault missions. But sometimes leadership meant making choices that others couldn't or wouldn't make. She moved through the shadows along the compound's perimeter, using the rocky terrain for concealment as she approached the fuel storage area. Enemy muzzle flashes lit up the darkness as the firefight continued between her teams and the hostile forces. The fuel tank was larger than it had appeared in the reconnaissance photos, standing nearly 8 feet tall and surrounded by smaller containers that likely held additional combustible materials. Sarah placed her explosive charges carefully, setting the timer for 90 seconds. "All teams, be ready to move in 60 seconds, she radioed. "When you see the northern sky light up, that's your signal to execute extraction." As Sarah moved away from the fuel tank, enemy fire suddenly erupted around her position. She had been spotted by a hostile sentry who was now calling out warnings in Arabic while shooting in her direction. Bullets ricocheted off the rocks near her head as she scrambled for better cover. "Commander is taking fire near the north perimeter." Harrison's voice came over the radio from his overwatch position. Multiple hostiles converging on her position. Sarah could hear at least 4 different weapons firing at her now. She was pinned behind a small rocky outcrop with limited ammunition and an explosive device that would detonate in less than 30 seconds. The situation had gone from dangerous to potentially catastrophic. "All teams, disregard the extraction signal," she ordered. "Abort current plan and implement backup extraction from your current positions." "Negative, Commander." Rodriguez's voice was firm. "We're proceeding as planned. You just worry about getting yourself out of there." The explosion, when it came, exceeded even Sarah's expectations. The fuel tank erupted in a massive fireball that lit up the entire valley and sent a mushroom cloud of smoke and flame hundreds of feet into the air. The concussion knocked her flat and temporarily deafened her, but it had the desired effect. Every enemy fighter in the compound immediately turned their attention toward the spectacular explosion, giving Rodriguez's team the opportunity they needed to move the hostages toward the extraction point. Mitchell's team used the distraction to break contact and reposition for covering fire. As Sarah regained her feet, she realized that her gamble had worked. Through her ringing ears, she could hear Rodriguez reporting successful movement with the hostages, and Mitchell confirming that enemy resistance had been significantly reduced. "Commander, what's your status?" Harrison's voice cut through the chaos. Sarah checked herself for injuries and found only minor cuts and bruises from the explosion's concussion. "I'm mobile and heading for the extraction point," she reported. The mission was succeeding, but Sarah knew they still had to get everyone out alive before enemy reinforcements could arrive from nearby villages. The real test of her leadership was just beginning. The extraction helicopters descended through the smoke-filled air as Sarah's team converged at the designated pickup point with the rescued hostages. The wounded journalist was conscious but losing blood from his leg wound, while his colleagues struggled with what appeared to be several broken ribs from their captivity. "Alpha Team at extraction point with packages," Rodriguez reported, as his men established a defensive perimeter around the landing zone. Despite the chaos of the mission, his voice carried the calm professionalism that Sarah had come to respect. The helicopters touched down in a whirlwind of sand and debris, their pilots maintaining power, while the team loaded the wounded hostages and prepared to depart. Sarah was the last to board, ensuring that every member of her team was accounted for before giving the signal to lift off. As the aircraft climbed away from the compound, Sarah looked back at the burning fuel storage facility and the scattered enemy positions they had just neutralized. The mission had succeeded, but not according to any plan they had rehearsed. Success had come through quick thinking, teamwork, and the kind of leadership that emerged under pressure. "Commander," Rodriguez said over the helicopter's intercom system, his voice barely audible above the rotor noise. "That was some piece of work back there. I've never seen a commanding officer put themselves at risk like that for the mission." Master Chief Harrison nodded his agreement from across the cabin. "Ma'am, you've got bigger stones than most of the male officers I've served under. That fuel tank gamble could have gotten you killed." Sarah felt a mixture of exhaustion and satisfaction as the Yemeni coast fell away behind them. The two rescued journalists were receiving medical attention from the team medic, and initial reports indicated they would make full recoveries once they reached proper medical facilities. 3 hours later, back at the forward operating base in Djibouti, Sarah stood in the debriefing room as her team recounted the mission details for the intelligence officers and senior commanders. The operation had been a complete success. Both hostages rescued, no friendly casualties, and significant damage inflicted on a terrorist cell that had been planning additional attacks on American interests. But what struck Sarah most was the transformation in how her team interacted with her. The skepticism and barely concealed hostility that had marked their first meeting had been replaced by genuine respect and loyalty. These battle-tested warriors now spoke to her as they would any proven leader. "The commander made the call that saved all our lives," Senior Chief Mitchell told the debriefing officer. "When the intelligence was wrong about the hostage location, she adapted the plan in real time. And when we got pinned down by superior numbers, she created the diversion that allowed us to complete the mission." Chief Rodriguez, the man who had publicly challenged her authority just weeks earlier, was even more emphatic. "Sir, Commander Chen is the kind of officer you want leading your men into combat. She doesn't just give orders from a safe position, she leads from the front and shares the risks with her team." After the formal debriefing concluded, Sarah found herself alone with Rodriguez in the base's small recreational facility. He approached her with something she had never seen from him before: humility. "Commander, I owe you an apology," he said, his usual confident demeanor replaced by genuine contrition. "When you first took command, I figured you were another desk jockey who didn't understand what we do. I was wrong. And I'm sorry." Sarah nodded, appreciating his honesty. "Chief, you had every right to be skeptical. Command is earned, not given. I had to prove myself just like anyone else would." Rodriguez smiled and extended his hand. "Well, you've definitely proven yourself. The men would follow you anywhere now. That fuel tank operation was either brilliant or completely insane. And honestly, the best military operations usually require a little bit of both." 6 months later, Sarah stood once again in the same conference room where her leadership journey with the SEALs had begun. But this time, she was briefing a new group of officers on lessons learned from special operations leadership. The room was filled with both male and female officers, many of whom faced similar challenges in establishing their credibility in traditionally male-dominated fields. "Leadership isn't about proving you're the toughest person in the room," she told the assembled officers. "It's about making the decisions that others can't or won't make and taking responsibility for the consequences. Gender, background, and previous experience matter less than your willingness to put the mission and your people before your own safety." Rodriguez, who had been promoted to Master Chief, sat in the back of the room. After the briefing, he approached Sarah with obvious pride in his former commander. "You know, Commander, that first day when I challenged you, I never imagined we'd be working together like this. The team still talks about that Yemen operation. You've become something of a legend among the SEALs." Sarah reflected on how much had changed since that confrontational first meeting. She had learned that earning respect in elite military units required more than just competence. It required a willingness to share risks, make hard decisions under pressure, and demonstrate that leadership meant serving those under your command rather than simply directing them. The lesson she had learned, and now taught to others, was that true authority came not from titles or positions, but from actions taken when everything was on the line. The men who had once questioned her qualifications now recommended her for promotion and spoke of her leadership as an example for others to follow. Her answer to their skepticism had been simple but powerful. She had proven through her actions that leadership was about character, courage, and commitment to the mission. Qualities that had nothing to do with gender and everything to do with the content of her character. In the end, that answer had shocked everyone around, including herself.